Welcome to the Profile Corner. In the last video I showed pictures from an auction as well as video clips from a different auction where there were various hand planes for sale. I have my own plane collection that I started collecting probably about 25 years ago or somewhere near that time, and then I stopped collecting somewhere around 20 years ago. I was inspired by a couple different websites that were around at the time. One of those websites is called Patrick's Blood and Gore. It's kind of an interesting website. It lists out various different Stanley and Bailey planes that were produced years ago. It appears that this website was originally designed in the late 1990s, so there's several Norm Abram jokes scattered throughout their article pages on the site. I'll include links to the site in this video's description, as well as a couple other sites that you might find interesting. So let's tilt the camera down and you can take a look at what I've got on the workbench in front of me. So here on the workbench, I have very long planes. These are 24-inch long number 8 planes. And then there's also shorter planes. This is a number 7. These two are number 6 planes. These 5 planes are all number 5 planes. These down here are number 4s, all the way out to here. Some of them are not manufactured by Stanley. And here's a number 3. There's also another interesting feature here that you may have noticed by looking at these. I'm going to take and sweep the camera across everything that's on the workbench right now so you can get a closer look, and maybe you can think about what some of the differences between these planes might be. Okay, and as you may have noticed by looking at the video of the fly-through on the workbench here, is that some of these planes have short front handles and others have tall handles. So here's a number 6 that has a tall handle, and right next to it is a number 6 that has a short handle. According to the Patrick's Blood and Gore website, there was a transition from short handles to tall handles. So when you're looking at these, you may have noticed that some of the tall handles have a ridge section down here at the bottom. That was supposed to reduce the risk that you would get chip out on the bottom of these handles, and that's why Stanley went to that other design. For instance, this plane over here does not have that ridge down low, while this one does. Another difference that you'll see that this Stanley number 8 down here says Bailey in the front, and this Stanley number 8 says number 8 at the front. So at the back side of this one it says number 8, and on the back side of this other one there's nothing there. So Stanley made some small changes here and there to the different planes as the manufacturing went on. You may have also noticed that looking at some planes, they have a smooth bottom like this plane, and other planes will have a corrugated bottom like this number 8. The corrugated bottom is supposed to reduce friction and suction as boards become smoother, especially with these larger planes. They could almost get stuck to the surface of a well-flattened board if they didn't have these corrugations. You may realize that these corrugations actually make a difference with some of the larger planes, whereas with some of the smaller planes, like this number 3 down here, There's no real advantage to having the corrugations on those, even though Stanley produced corrugations on the number 3s, the small planes like this one, all the way up to the number 8s. And in addition to that, they also produced the number 2, which I don't have an example of here. Those are kind of scarce, but there was also a number 2 model that had the corrugations on the bottom. Okay, so I found some interesting websites in addition to Patrick's Blood and Gore that you may want to check out. I'll show you a real quick preview on the computer that I've got here of some of these sites. And I've also got a real quick video clip that shows some of these as well. So there's a lot of detailed information on this Patrick's Blood and Gore website. And the copyright on this does not allow me to reproduce it, so that's why I'm scanning through it so quickly here. But you can then go in and you can take a look at, okay, the planes number 1 through 8. The number 1 would be the smallest, the number 8 would be the largest. This gives a lot of detailed information and includes various pictures. So why don't we take a look at those video clips now, where I show you the different tabs that I've got up here on this computer. The database MegaChart website, which is no longer officially on the internet, you have to go through the Wayback Machine to get to it, has all kinds of detailed categories listed over here at the left side, and then over at the right side are listings whether or not a particular age of Stanley Bailey plane has a particular feature, and that could help you to figure out how old some of your planes are if you've also got a plane collection. Here's that same website on the Wayback Machine. So now I can just go into the database MegaChart. And here's various different categories. And this is going to appear very small on your screen. But you can see there's various different categories. You can use it to figure out roughly how old your plane is, whether or not your plane has that feature. I found another site on the internet that shows different Stanley Bailey types. This is a Wooden Shop site that put together this flowchart to help you figure out how old your plane is. And the unfortunate thing that I've figured out from reading various different pieces of information is that this may only apply to the Stanley number 4 planes, that the other planes may have a different pattern in terms of when features changed on those other types of planes. So for instance, this Stanley Bailey plane, which is a number 8, has Bailey in the front and number 8 at the back. And so we can look at this flowchart here. It starts out, how many patent dates do you see behind the frog? Plane has 3 patent dates behind, and so then what we could do is we could look at the 3 here, and you use that as a starting point. That includes types 11 and 12, and then you can look at, is there a large 1 1/4 inch or a small 1 inch depth adjustment nut? And so then you can look on the back side here and make that determination if this is a large or a small. And that is a 1 inch depth adjustment nut. And according to the chart here, a 1 inch is a small, so that's between 1910 and 1918, according to this chart. Okay, this other number 8, it has no patent dates behind, and so then you've got to look at a different section here, and you've got to work through the first column to see how old this plane is. And obviously, because this has a short front handle on it, it puts it prior to 1920, or 1920 at the most. Of course, there's always the possibility that Stanley used the shorter handles after 1920. It could be that the description on Patrick's Blood and Gore site only applies to certain model planes and not all of them. So this is a detailed flowchart that you could go through and try to figure out how old Stanley planes are. Another tip-off is that in the early 1930s, the Stanley lever cap was changed from being a straight design like this one here. This is on a number 6. From being a straight design like you see here to being more of a kidney shape like you can see on this one, which has a taller handle on it. So that's another possible way that you can date these so that you know that this plane was prior to the early 1930s and this one was after the early 1930s. And because it has a tall handle on it, if these are the original parts, then you know that this plane is newer than the 1930s. At least the early 1930s. And you can go through and try to figure out all the other different things. I was so intrigued by the Patrick's Blood and Gore site. Every time I went to an auction, I'd look for another plane that had a different detail to it. So if I already had a Stanley plane with a corrugated base on it, and a tall handle, I'd look for another plane that has a short handle on it and no corrugations, or vice versa. And unfortunately, once I got through some of the models, I forgot that I already had some of the models of the number 5s, so it makes it a little bit difficult to try to collect them all, so to speak. Although you do get some oddballs, like this one here, which has a short front handle on it, and it has a kidney-style lever cap. So it's possible that these are not the original parts that were on this plane. Somebody may have put the parts together. Maybe they didn't have a lever cap for their older plane, and so they found one from a newer plane and put it on. And some of these planes are technically not planes. Some of them are Spokeshaves, like these here. This is a two-bladed model, so that you can do both rounded types of spokes and also a flat blade for other types of spoke shaving. And this one here has got just a straight blade across. And then there's different types of other planes. This one has 2 positions for the plane blade. This is the number 78, which is called a duplex Philister and rabbit plane. And also I've got another one here that looks a little bit different, and this only says made in the USA in that location. So I'm not exactly sure if this is a Stanley plane or if it's a different model of the Stanley plane or just what. But it's interesting seeing all the different designs that you can find. So here's 2 other similar type of planes, and yet they're not exactly similar. These allow having the cutter up close to the edge of the plane, as you can see right there. These are considered to be rabbiting planes because it allows going right up to the edge of a cutout section in a board. And so that's interesting. This is a 180, and this one is a 181. So they're slightly different widths. And then you've got cabinet scrapers, like these 2 examples here. This one is a number 80. I don't see any kind of a label on this one to say what kind it is, but it looks like it may be a knockoff, or it could be that Stanley was cheapening their design, or maybe some of the original parts broke because they don't have the fancy thumb wheels there like this number 80 Stanley has. Just have rather simple wing nuts. And I've also got some wooden bodied planes. I can't read what the model number is of this one, but it's kind of a interesting design. This is probably over 100 years old. And here's another one here. And unfortunately, this one ended up coming into contact with a concrete floor for several years, so it got quite rusty. Unfortunately, I wasn't storing these in the best conditions, and so that's going to be a problem. Maybe someday I'll get that cleaned up so it looks a little bit nicer, but I don't want to destroy the patina on these because that's part of the value of the planes. And this little plane right here is kind of a novelty little item. Stanley sold these as a number 101. This was not actually produced by Stanley. It says on the back here it was made by Knapp. So apparently these were made by several different companies, modeled after the Stanley plane. It's an interesting little design. I believe that it said on Patrick's Blood and Gore site that these were more or less just toys originally, and then people found interesting uses for them, and then they became an item that Stanley would sell to the general public beyond just being toys. And I'm sure that you'll find lots of other interesting planes, like this plane here. This is a router plane, and this is probably what got me into collecting routers. Obviously, that's just a joke. Here's a model 71 Stanley router plane. I haven't used this one yet. I bought it quite a few years ago, and thinking that it would come in handy for the ability to dig down into sections, but I haven't really used it. And of course, this here in the front isn't really a plane or a spoke shave. This is a draw knife. And back when I was in early elementary school, I remember using one of these. It was probably longer than this one. And I would go out into the woods, cut down a sassafras tree, and then I would use this to make that into a baseball bat. And I'd take it to school. And I'm surprised that I didn't get kicked out for bringing a weapon into school. But I brought in the sassafras baseball bat and used it in gym class. It didn't really do much better, if at all, as well as the regular hardwood bats that we had for gym class. But it was interesting to be able to cut your own tree down and then to make it into something useful. I guess that was my first foray into woodworking. It's creating a bat in the early elementary years. And obviously I don't want to leave out my Stanley number 45 back here in the corner, which I picked up at an auction in its original box, which you can see there. I paid probably a little bit over $100 for this, if I'm recalling correctly. Patrick's Blood and Gore website didn't have very high opinions of the Stanley 45 because these don't do a very good job at eliminating chip out. In other words, they're quite prone to producing chip out when the boards are cut using the cutters because there's no support behind the blade. And so that's a problem with this type of design. And here's the original instructions that came in the package. And then I've got quite a few knives down in here. As you can see there, it's got a nice label on it. All sorts of different designs. So this was more or less the predecessor to the modern router that's able to cut all sorts of different profiles just by changing the bit. Well, there's quite a few in here that are interesting. I've never really used this. This is just more or less for historical purposes that I picked this up at an auction. I thought it was an interesting design, and they made this for quite a few years. And there's also a couple other cutters down in here that go along with a plane. I'm sure that if you've started collecting planes, you might have some Lie Nelson planes or other planes that are based on some of these old Stanleys. So it's kind of interesting to look at the historical nature of hand planes to see where things have come from, how much has changed and how little has changed over the last 150 years or so since these planes were introduced. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Bye.